Welcome back to Tales of Abundance, or welcome if it's your first time. I'm Dr. John Oberg, here as always with my co-host Randy Lorensen. Randy, welcome back.
Good morning, John.
How are you?
Doing great. Yourself?
Great. Hope it's morning time for the listeners. Maybe it's afternoon for you. Morning for us.
Yeah, whatever.
It's afternoon
They'll
somewhere.
adapt.
It's afternoon somewhere. It's always 5 o'clock somewhere. Today's topic's a fun one. It's about financial finish lines.
Yeah, this is a great topic, and I think you were the one that I think I'd heard this, but you're the one that really introduced me to this 10 plus years ago, and I know it's been beneficial for me. So I'm excited to share this with the audience today.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I had a view of what a financial finish line was pretty early in my career, and then it changed pretty radically for me. Like, not what the finish line was, but how I thought about it, how I defined what a financial finish line was. I probably, 15 years ago, had a mentor share a different point of view that I really embraced. So I'm excited to get into that because I don't know which side of the coin you fall on, and we haven't talked a lot about this since we've talked about it, in a coaching scenario. And I think we intentionally, getting ready for today, didn't dive into that so we could have that conversation as we were recording.
Yeah, I think we mostly agree, but I think there'll be some subtle differences that based on world macro factors.
Yeah. I think about all the books that I read growing up. I didn't have a whole lot of financial acumen coming out of my household. I tell people all the time, there's very broadly, generally speaking, there's three kinds of households you grow up in, right? One is a household where you don't talk about money. It's rude. That was the kind of household that I grew up in. Then there's the kind of household that you grow up in where money doesn't grow on trees, and so you talk about it, but every penny is really, highly thought of. And then there's the you can't take it with you households where it's it kind of flows like water. And I don't have any judgments about which one is better or worse. But, broadly speaking, people grow up in one of those types of environments, sometimes a mixture of the two. But I remember very clearly when my parents were paying bills one month and I was a little kid, and I walked into the little room where they were paying the bills. I was excused from the room quickly. The door was shut. And then they had that conversation behind closed doors. And I didn't think much of it at the time, but it really was interesting. Later on, I was 14 years old, and my mom took me to the bank, helped me open a bank account, and then helped me sign up for a class in school, high school, where they taught you how to balance your checkbook, which it was cool. They had that class, by the way. I don't know that all schools have that class, but the class taught me how to balance the checkbook, not my mom. And then the next real financial conversations that I had were around, with people at work, and I'm not talking about, I certainly asked my mom for money, in college, but in terms of talking about how to manage money, how to handle money, it was a real interesting upbringing for me.
Yeah, I think of it slightly different. You mentioned the money doesn't grow on trees, and that's certainly the environment that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And I think more than even the household, I think it was the community. That was almost everybody in that community, but it was a scarcity mindset is the way I think of it versus an abundance mindset.
Yeah. Well, and so moving forward, then I read a whole bunch of books that were really interesting to me. I think, I just pulled up, I think it was the Wall Street Journal has a bunch of personal finance guides that my sons read this summer that helped them start to get some vocabulary and get them interested in investing and what that might look like. And I wanted them to have some vocabulary around that. I learned some of that in a book called The Wealthy Barber, which was one of the books that one of my mentors early in my career gave me. And it helped me to understand the power of compound interest and how you save money, and then what you can do to earn money passively using the stock market. And come to think about it, my grandfather helped me buy a stock when I was in middle school at one point, and he tried to get me into investing, but he was so distant from my life in the sense that we didn't talk day to day that, talking about that once a year didn't really stick. I just remembered that just now. He helped me buy a stock, but I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
He showed me the newspaper where, we used to try to track the stocks, but it didn't land.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, for me, that was stuff that I had to just figure out. When I started making a little money, I just started buying stocks.
Well, you've talked about this, though, with your dad and cattle, how he used to take paper and figure out all the expenses of raising cattle. And so, I mean, you actually saw what a budget looked like. And
Right.
I mean,
Yes, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, that was definitely a lesson. For me, the lesson for that was more about making a plan and why I make spreadsheets and a model, right?
yeah,
That had more to do with modeling, I think, but there were financial basics. And growing up in a household where, the joke I always use, my dad threw nickels around like they're manhole covers, is, that scarcity mindset. It wasn't that you didn't talk about money. You
Yeah.
talked about it. You just talked about how you didn't have anything and everything was expensive, and the answer to everything was, we can't afford it.
yeah,
Right? Which I didn't ever, I really don't remember asking for anything ever. Maybe Christmas presents, but that just wasn't part of the deal. If you wanted something, you worked and you earned it.
yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, I don't have any hard feelings about that. In fact, probably benefited because of it.
What was your first car?
It was a 1978 Plymouth Horizon that had over 100,000 miles on it when I bought it, which, if you remember, those cars were not well made. 100,000 miles is when you retired those cars, not when you bought it.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it had 110, 120. I mean, it was
You remember what you paid for it?
$1,000,
Yeah.
give or take. It was really close to $1,000, which I'm pretty sure I got ripped off.
Yeah. So my first car was so I was born in 1973. My first car was a 1973 Monte Carlo, and I joke with people it was 3 colors. It was primer, rust, and paint. It was just, we used to joke the 260 air conditioning. You roll down 2 windows and go 60. Yeah.
Yeah, my second car was a Chevy Monza Spider. When the Horizon wore out, the only thing I could afford was that Monza, and I paid $200 or $300 for it.
Yeah.
And it had over 200,000 miles. It was actually built better than the Horizon, but it was not great. It used to be like the Flintstones car, where it was so rusted on the bottom that you could see, if you moved the floor mats, you could definitely see the highway going under you as you drove. And for probably a year, I was so broke in college that the alternator went out and I couldn't afford to replace the alternator. So I would either try and park it on a hill so that when I would get in, it was a standard transmission.
Yeah.
So I would park it on the hill so I could roll it down the hill and I could push start it that way. Or if it was on a flat surface, for a year, I would get out, run alongside the car, pushing it, jump in, pop the clutch, and away I would go. I did that. I mean, in my Vector days, when I was selling Cutco, I would park down the street from the customer's house because I didn't want them to see me when I left having to push start my car.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. My car had a great engine, man. It was I think it was like a Chevy 350 or something. But I will say that inside the interior, I had to using a staple gun, I had to staple an surplus army blanket as my upholstery because it was like all the foam was popping out, and yeah, the speakers were blown, didn't work at all. So I actually I took one of the speakers out of my mom's stereo system, strapped it to the Mac middle seat, and then ran speaker wire over the front bench seat, then under the dashboard into the stereo system so that I could have speakers.
Yeah.
And I left enough speaker wire in there, like 30 or 40 feet of speaker wire, so if I was out with friends, I could actually pull the speaker out, put it on the hood, and that was my version of a boombox.
Pretty great country we live in that we could start out with that and be talking about a financial finish line today.
Yeah. That's
that definitely has been opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I've noticed in traveling is that not every country you have the opportunity to move from station to station in life, and certainly, and I certainly don't want to draw a picture that I grew up in like a really super poor neighborhood. I grew up in a pretty well-to-do, middle class, sheltered upbringing, but my parents just didn't give me, and I appreciate that and I wouldn't say that we were wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. My mom was a single mom, raising 4 kids after my dad passed away, and so it was tight. But I never felt that. Like, so you talked about like nickels like manhole covers. I never felt that type of energy, and I'm sure it was really tight. But yeah, just never felt. And I think that's the thing. It's like everyone has some kind of relationship with money, and money is a tool, but it's this really emotional tool that. I think people just get really fired up about it for reasons to me that are very understandable. And so,
well, and it impacts people. It was when I started selling, that was a detriment to me.
Yeah.
Because everything seemed expensive.
Sure. Oh yeah, for sure.
And asking for a sale, I mean, if I think back to our Cutco days, and I was starting out, a homemaker was, you asked for a sale on a $611 set of knives, back in, this was the 80s. That was all the money in the world to me, right?
Sure.
Like it was, I just didn't believe people were going to buy that.
Yeah. And,
I was right? So, I mean, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Now, eventually, I figured out a lot of that was my head trash, and I overcame that.
Yeah.
But that just made it that much harder. Made it a lot harder. And I working with salespeople over the years, I've seen this a lot, right? There's a lot of people that really, they just put so much on price.
Well, and the flip side of that is that there are people that are so cavalier about price, it can be equally as off-putting for people, right?
Yeah.
I did this exercise once. I don't remember who gave it to me. I don't remember the whole exercise, but I think I had to go to like 4 people who I was uncomfortable asking them about money. And I have the questions somewhere. I'll have to go find them. But the questions were like, I had to ask people that I knew personally, how much money do you make? What's the, most money you've ever lost? What's the most you've ever gained? What makes you comfortable and uncomfortable? And I went and talked to like my parents were some of them. My father-in-law at the time, and then my financial advisors. And it was so uncomfortable for me.
Were you allowed to tell them what you were doing?
No,
that was part of an exercise?
You weren't allowed to tell them what you were doing, because I was trying to get comfortable discussing money, and it was in a sales environment, right? And so it was a really cool exercise. And then at that point, I was talking to a psychotherapist as well. I was in therapy, and so I had that whole discussion inside therapy as well, which was it really helped me have a healthier relationship with money as a tool. It just became something I could hold loosely instead of holding tightly. And so, yeah, it was a big deal. So early in my career, one of the things I was taught to do to kind of find a financial finish line was all about assets. It was all about like how many assets you had to have, like how many, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars you wanted to have saved so that you could have financial freedom. That's the way that I thought about a financial finish line early days. Similar?
Yeah. And I mean, I think for me, for a long time, I thought about it in terms of bonds, even though bonds have never been my preferred way of investing by any means. It was what return can you make on whether it's 1 year, 10-year, 30-year treasuries, and to maintain your lifestyle, right? And so for me, the asset was specifically interest-bearing assets, bonds, or savings account, money market, whatever you prefer.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like Monopoly is a super cool game about real estate investing, right? Like you learn a lot about real estate investing in Monopoly. There's another great game by Kiyosaki called Cash Flow, which is I guess a genius game. Play with my kids; they love it, and it really talks a lot about leaving the rat race. I want to offer a different version of a financial finish line that one of my mentors pointed out to me, and I really think it's genius. And it wasn't about the assets. The financial finish line was about the most money you ever wanted to spend in a given year. It was like, what was your lifestyle financial finish line? Like, what was the peak of your lifestyle? And the whole thesis was that it gives you an opportunity to get out of the rat race, because once you hit it, you don't need to keep pushing for more.
Yeah, I was thinking about this last night in preparing for this, and I think part of the reason this financial finish line is important, so I used to go to the gym and have this problem where I would go, okay, I'm just going to warm up on this elliptical machine or this treadmill for 5 or 10 minutes. And the way I'm wired, I would get in and I'd go, oh, I'm at 0.8 of a mile. Well, I might as well finish a mile. And then I was like, well, now I might as well go 15 minutes. Well, now look at how many calories I've burned. There were times that I started out intending to warm up on an elliptical machine for 5 or 10 minutes. And 90 minutes later, I was still on a damn machine. Right?
That's the rat race, right?
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And I couldn't get off it because I'm so damn competitive, even something idiotic like that for myself, that I wanted to go to the next 5 or 10 minutes, the next mile or half mile or, 100 calories burned or whatever it was.
Yeah, I would never do that.
And, but that's something I don't even want to do. I hate doing cardio in the gym.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy it. I don't like it. And even there, so people earning more money, most people like this. So I think it's even easier to just keep going for more, and never so I think it's really important to define how much is enough.
Well, and that's the whole point of the financial finish line exercise that I take people through now, is like understanding what you're spending today, which for some people they have a really good handle on that, and some people don't have a great handle on that. And then understanding what the peak looks like, and taking people through what that lifestyle is like, and then saying, okay, well, in retirement, how does it change from the peak? And for some people, it stays the same. For some people, it changes. But understanding, and then I think backing into the asset numbers are really, an easier equation at that point if someone chooses to do that. For some people, it's not about backing into it. Like for me, like I think there is an asset number for sure, but I know that once I hit my financial finish line and I'm ready to retire so that I have some, passive income in retirement that I don't want to have to work, I still plan to do work.
Right.
I just won't need to do it for the money.
Right. And I think that's something that's changed in my mind over the years, right?
Yeah.
Is like growing up, everybody wanted to retire. That was this like, I don't know, the golden ring that everybody, or the mountain everybody was trying to climb, was getting to that point where they didn't have to work. And now, as I get closer and closer and closer to that age, I look at it and I think, what the hell would I do? Like it's a big part of my identity. But yeah, it's being able to not have to work if I don't want to, and be able to work on whatever it is I want to work on.
Well, and younger generations are taking a different approach to that a little bit, in the sense that a lot of younger people are doing some of the things while they're active, while they're healthy, while they're young, that they want to do, knocking off some of those bucket list items. And I think that's there's a balance to be found, of course. Right. I have a little tag on my desk someone gave me. It's from Oscar Wilde. It said moderation in all things, including moderation, which is, I think, just genius. And so I think there are people that are understanding, like, retirement it's a political construct, right?
Yeah. I mean, but it's still finding worth or value in the world and something to strive for, right? But, or maybe strive's not the right word, but something that people want to do, and just having the finances to be able to work, not have to work.
Yeah, we talk about the 4 phases of a career, right? The warrior, king, prince, sage, and so really it's about how does the sage doesn't have to earn in the way that a king does. Like, that's just different. And so you do it for different reasons. And by the way, it might even be work for pay. It could be volunteer work, could be giving back to community, family, whatever the case may be. I think there's a lot to be said for understanding how to get ready for that 4th phase.
So I think we've been kind of beating around the bush of what it is, right? Do you want to
do we agree now? Like,
do you want to put a bow on that?
Did you think it was an asset number, or did you think it was a budget? Because to me, the financial.
I think it's. I think of it more as cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, toward the end of this, we're going to get into some things that I think are different, or I think there's, some potential issues, but this isn't really quite at the time. But I think it's cash flow that allows you to live the lifestyle.
Yeah. And I think choosing the lifestyle deliberately is like, there's some things I thought I wanted in my life, and then I realized what it would take to get there, and realized, hey, there's some trade-offs I don't want to have to make. And that's okay. And by the way, I mean, I work pretty hard. Like, I don't know a lot of people who work harder than me. And I didn't have a business handed to me or anything. Like, I started, I built my own stuff, but and certainly fairly comfortable. I just, there's a place where I don't want to have to keep working anymore.
Yeah. So and by the way, listeners, on talesofabundance.com, John has a great tool that we'll put up there that you can download. You can put this in and play with the numbers. But in rough numbers, it's your housing or shelter, right? That whether you're paying for it or paying a mortgage, that it may be, so if it's paid for, maybe it's just the taxes, your utilities, your food, your travel, your vehicle, whatever it is in your lifestyle. your
Yeah,
month.
and this is a pretty comprehensive spreadsheet that has like a row for everything, and you don't have to use them all, obviously. But it's like, if you're going to pay for pets, if you're going to pay for, travel, like all those things are in there, and then it's cool because you can see like the monthly expenses versus the annual expenses, and then you can see how much you're spending now, and then next to that you can say, okay, how much do I want to spend in the future, and then how much do I think that might be in retirement, and you can compare those three things and see what it looks like.
So to be clear, it's your desired lifestyle and the income it takes to live that lifestyle.
That's right.
Forever.
Yep.
Right? And the whole point is that you have enough back to the assets. You have enough in assets that they throw off the income.
Yeah, you move from active income to passive income. And again, just one more way, we should definitely get a link to Cash Flow the game on here, because cash flow is it's a little bit more sophisticated than Monopoly. Not so easy for younger kids to play, but a really great way to get people understanding like my expenses versus my active cash flow versus how do I make passive cash flow. And so really, really fun game to play. Yeah, love it. Okay, it seems like you were going to turn a corner here. Take us around the corner.
Well, let's talk a little bit about why it's important.
Yeah.
Right? Because some people are listening, and we have people of different ages, right? Somebody that's 60 years old is probably pretty obvious. Somebody that is just getting out of school and starting a career or starting a business, I don't know that it was so obvious to me then, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about why? Why do people need it?
Well, and delayed gratification is a tough thing, and it's not as easy as it used to be, right? Like there's a lot more instant gratification to be found in our world right now. And so delayed gratification is a little tougher. And I had a great conversation back to that therapy part of it. One of the things that came out of that was he said, there's no right and wrong about this stuff. Like if you want to save some percentage of your income, 10%, and somebody else wants to save none, that's not right or wrong. Those are preferences, right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? That's for me, I'm just investing in the future because I want to live a long life. Other people are like, hey, I'm just going to spend it while I got it. And that's like, I don't have a value judgment about that. But I do think that if people do want to be able to focus on more time instead of more money, one of the ways to do is to have the money to trade the money for the time, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I've witnessed in my life a couple of things. I've told the story before about my grandma's brother that never spent any money.
Yep.
Everybody assumed he was broke and boarded up windows because he didn't want to pay for glass.
Yeah.
Right. And then when he died, he had millions of dollars just sitting there.
Yep.
And no kids, no family. And that seems less than optimal, to say the least.
Unnecessary. How about that?
Yeah. And, I mean, he could have probably enjoyed life a little more by spending some of that. Whereas I've also witnessed people that...
Well, hold on. You got to tell the rest of the story. How did it change? Because he left the money to your grandmother.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this in What is Abundance, but in that episode, but my grandma got the money, and she never had any money.
Yeah.
Kind of lived the same way. I mean, she didn't have boarded up windows or anything, but she just gave all the money away. Whether it was giving it to the church, giving it to family, making, mittens for kids. She gave everything away.
Yeah.
And and her sisters, I don't know what her sisters did with it, but he had enough money that, it spread around, right?
Yeah.
So that's one extreme. And the other extreme is we've all seen people that they spend and they spend and they spend, and then they get to retirement and there's nothing left.
Yeah.
And they struggle, right? And they're trying to live off Social Security, which I guess people do, but that's not the future. Back to the lifestyle, that's not the lifestyle I want, and that I have no desire to have that struggle in old age.
Yeah, and I think that fixed income just means fixed choices for some people, and they don't love that, and that's, again, no value judgment about that. Just I think that for me, I want people to know they have choices ahead of them, right? And so one of my core values is being deliberate, right? And so I just want people to know that whether you make a decision or if you decide not to make a decision about that today. And I can't remember the exact numbers when I was going back 30 years in my brain, but someone said like if you were to save, $2,000 every year from the day you were born until you were 18, and then did it, when you were 18 to 64, which one of you would have more money?
I'm pretty sure it would be the 18, right? The power of compound.
Yeah, because you get compound interest for all those years. And so The Wealthy Barber is a great book. If you haven't read it, it's a great read. Maybe a little dated, but Dave Chilton is the author.
I feel like I read it several years ago, or I might have read a summary.
Yeah.
I think of The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yeah.
It was a good book I read that, again, many years ago along those lines. But I think having a realistic plan, people can make decisions, right? So if they choose to spend today, they just need to know they're either going to have to work until forever or live off Social Security or whatever it is. And if they want to save but there's a lot of value and I think freedom in knowing what is enough. I'm thinking now, if I would have gone to the gym back then and been really defiant on all I need is 1 mile or 2 mile of warm up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have found myself spending 90 minutes getting extra warm up more than what I intended.
Yeah. Were you warm after an hour?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, that's great. And so when is enough? I think that's a part. And so that's a rich psychological question for people, right? But I think one of the ways you can do that is say, this is the lifestyle I want to lead. This is the level of spending I want to have. And it's okay for that to shift over time.
Yeah. And it's different for everybody,
That's right?
I think in today's environment, you can't help but think about Elon Musk. I mean, he has, what did they just report recently? $300 billion, but he's trying to colonize Mars. That's not going to be cheap. If most people they do not need the war chest to go colonize Mars or do whatever else it is that he's trying to do. If they're just going to live and take care of their yard and, putz around and...
Unless their yard's on Mars.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read somewhere, I don't know if this, and this is not the stratosphere that I want to play in, but I read somewhere that if you were a multi-billionaire like Elon Musk and another person had $100 million invested, that the lifestyle itself, if you were willing not to buy things, if you just rented the experiences, you could have essentially exactly the same experiences day to day. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but and I'm sure somebody like Musk would say, like, hold my beer, like, watch this. But
well, is your life noticeably better if you have a $10 million house or a $20 million house or a $30 million or even a million or two? I mean, it depends on where you live, right? And there's a lot of parts of the country where $1 million house is a mansion.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And there's other parts of the country where that's a 800 square foot bungalow.
Yeah, I think at the same time, what I go back to is just, helping people to be deliberate about the things they want to have and how do you get from here to there. And there's different, here's and different there's. And so the value of having the financial finish line to me is taking stress off of people. So we talked about what it is. I think maybe we get into the why for a second. I think the really powerful why of a financial finish line is it reduces stress in most circumstances. So I can't tell you the number of executives I've talked to and said, okay, let's talk about where you are today. Let's talk about where you want to go. Let's talk about what you have, and let's look at the glide path to get there. And a number of them have been like, well, I'm on the glide path. Like, nothing needs to change. And then I ask, well, what does that do to your stress level? It's like, well, that just reduced it a bunch. And so, if money can be stressful for somebody, then having understanding like what you can control and what you don't control oftentimes reduces that anxiety. Not always, and not 100%, but I think having a really crystal clear view of it makes it important. I was, yeah. So I think talking to my son recently, he thought there's something we couldn't afford, and I was like, hey man, we can afford that. And I showed him the checkbook. It's like that's a lot of money to you, but I can help with that, so you don't need to worry about that thing. Well, I also told him it was my money, not his.
Yeah. Important distinction. So, what about people that want to leave a legacy, right? Like, you have kids, people have kids. Some people want to spend it all.
Sure.
Some people want to leave their kids set up or their grandkids set up,
sure,
etc. So, how does that play?
I think that's just all part of the planning, right? Again, I don't have any value judgment about which one somebody wants to do. I think you just have to plan for it. So if you want to leave, generational wealth or a little bit of wealth or help for, whatever, I don't care. But I think just being deliberate with it is, to me, what I think people are, what I encourage people to do is be deliberate with it. And that's one of the big questions I have is, what will I leave for my children? That's a question as I get into this phase of life that I think through. And, I've got mentors and peers that we talk about, and you and I talk about this kind of stuff. And so, again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just what's important to me. And so I've filled out, one of the things that I've given you and that I have I've got probably 80% complete, is something called the Family Love Letter. And it's like a letter of all of my intentions. And it lays out, like, in case I die, like, what do I want to have happen? And it includes a will and an estate plan and all those things. But it also includes, like, all of the thinking around how I would hope those funds would be used.
Let's flesh that out a little more with leaving kids. I think maybe there is a right. I mean, look, the right answer for you and the right answer for me might be two different things.
Sure.
I accept that. But I do kind of think there's best practices. And you, of all people, are best practices. I mean, maybe we ought to just, go into this a little bit. Because some people, they believe they don't want to leave their kids very much.
Yeah.
Right? Because they want them to earn it. And they don't want to raise little assholes. And they want to, like that's their belief system.
Sure.
And other people give their kids everything because they want to do, they want their kids to have it easy. And that is, sometimes those kids aren't appreciative, and I think those kids more likely get into drugs or whatever else. Probably the answer somewhere in the middle. I think Warren Buffett, is giving away most of his money, but he's leaving, sizable income to his kids as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. This is a tough question, and maybe it's different based on the kid even. But
I think that's right, and I think some of those kids become philanthropists. I think for me, it's not a question of money. For me, it's a question of my values, and so one of my beliefs is that humans are made to work. Right. So I'm a pretty devout Catholic, and so I tell people, like, Adam and Eve were working in the Garden of Eden before the fall. So I know that humans are built to work, and there's biological truth to the fact that we're built to work. I think that muscles, they either you're growing and strengthening your muscles, or the muscles are atrophying. And so my only hope for my children is that they are happy, functional members of society that are producing value for society in the way that they feel called to do that, and not in the ways that I necessarily think might be, or hope they would be called to society. And so, and that's great. And so I want to teach them how to open doors for themselves. And that's not just financially, by the way, that just open doors for themselves for their lives. And that's so the money to me is really secondary to all of that. And so it's just a tool to be looked at in light of that lens. It's not. And so my financial finish line doesn't contemplate like this massive amount of money that I will leave to the children. It also doesn't mean that I won't have, some money that gets left over as something that they can do with it. But I'm not working for generational wealth as a legacy. My legacy, I want to be in the work that I do. And so that's how I view that.
Yeah. And some people want to leave, I think reading Walter Isaacson's biography of Benjamin Franklin, right?
So good.
He created, things that, he created a university, and he created all these things. He had a fund that he set aside for the city of Pennsylvania that they couldn't touch for, 200 years? Something like that. So leaving money there. I mean, there's a lot of things when it comes to legacy that may or may not play into a financial finish line.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So if it's somebody that just wants enough to be able to hang with their family, be comfortable, buy food, keep the electricity on, putts in their backyard, that's a very different number than Elon going to Mars. And then somewhere in the middle is the person who maybe they want to live in a little bigger house, take a little nicer vacations.
Keep the jet fueled.
cheap jet fuel, whatever, right? If they want a boat, etc., whatever it is that they're into.
Yeah.
They might have expensive hobbies, or they want to leave a legacy for their kids or the city or whatever organization they're passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give you the number, but my wife and I have a big number for travel. Like we both love traveling, and so we want to be able to really enjoy that when we're not working like we work today.
Right.
And so we'll travel a lot. And
how much is a lot?
I'm not going to give you the number, but
I'm not saying the dollar amount, but how much? Like, do you want to travel? Is a lot 2 weeks a year, a month a year, 6 months a year?
I mean, weeks or months per year for sure. We want to be able to I think we both agree that it'd be great to spend 6 months or a year in Sydney because, she loves it there. I've never been to Australia, but I'm sure that it would be great. I'd love to be able to pick up and go see the kids wherever they happen to be in the world anytime, like without thinking about it. And then when I travel long distances, I've never been able, I've traveled first class a couple times in my life. And so I want to be able to pay for that without it being a guilty pleasure. I want to be guilt free when I do that.
Yeah, I love the idea of just being able to go spend a month somewhere.
Yeah.
And, I see people, they go to Italy and they spend a week and they see 6 different places, and that's great. But I like to go somewhere and spend a week.
Yeah.
So I would like to go spend 6 weeks in Italy and stay a week in 6 different places, or whatever it is, right? Or 3 months, and do the same thing in Germany or Thailand or Australia or any place. I think that's a freedom, and people are doing that now with working remotely.
That's right.
Right. That's becoming more and more
the digital
popular
nomad.
which I think is great if people can do it. I mean, I think even the end of my poker career, I started going places. I wish I would have figured that out sooner. Yeah.
And so I think, again, I see people who love fishing like that, or love golf like that, or love cars like that, or for me, I want to be with the people in my life that matter. So I've got a group of friends that we travel the world. And so with my friends, I could be doing anything and have fun doing it. And so it doesn't cost a tremendous amount from that perspective. I've got this little cube of 36 dice that I carry with me. We play Liar's Dice, and I could make new friends playing Liar's Dice anywhere in the world.
Great game, by the way. John turned me on to this. It really is fantastic.
Yeah. Yes. You can take dice with you anywhere, and it's just such a great, inexpensive way to enjoy. And the craziest things happen, so people laugh, and
it really is fantastic. So, roughly, you don't have to go into every detail, but roughly the big picture buckets, your financial finish line. Give the listeners an idea what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you've got housing, and then you've got kind of your day-to-day living expenses that are all of the stuff you covered already, the household stuff, and then it's clothing can be really expensive for some people, not so much for me, but those kinds of things. Travel's the big one for us, right?
Right.
The big shocker for me, I used to really think that I wanted to have a fancy car, and I've had some pretty fancy cars over the last several years, but now we live in an urban lifestyle. I don't drive that much, and so that was a pretty big shift for me. And then the big question, we're having is second home, certainly that it's affordable, but it's for us in our lifestyle, but that's not something we value right now. Maybe when the kids get older and they have kids, maybe that changes. So certainly open-minded. So that's kind of a big question mark in my financial finish line, is that idea of a second property.
So what do you do? So there's uncertainty, right? So you've set a goal.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think we need to come back to how this has changed over time. We'll circle back to that. But so you've got a pretty good idea. I want to live this way. I want to eat at these restaurants. I want to take these vacations, wear these clothes, etc. But you don't know that you want a second home. So how do you approach that?
I just kind of budget it in as, what I can choose this or that. And, I set my financial finish line for the first time in 2006, and inflation adjusted, it hasn't really changed. I set the number, and that number's pretty much the same.
Mine's changed. So I've done the exercise 3-4 times, and every time I come up with a different number.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess that's not being clear enough on that. I guess that is not being clear enough on what is the lifestyle.
Yeah,
is really the whole of that.
well, I think at the end of the day, it's the stress that it has relieved from me by knowing, right? Because it's like, okay, all I need is this. And there have been a couple times throughout so it's 16 years ago that I set that number, right? And no, longer, 18 years ago I set that number. And so there have been a couple times I've seen, friends, acquaintances, people I know kind of like you have some really nice events happen that financially, I was like, oh, I could do that. And like, but that's not the point. The point isn't could I do it? The point is, what would I do with it if I did? And so I just try to mind my knitting, It's like I'm on my path.
Yeah. It's great.
So real quick, I'm gonna follow that up with it. I saw a quote yesterday, or a paraphrase and this guy said it came from a Japanese actor, but I've heard this in lots of places, and it's like gratitude is about appreciating what you do have instead of focusing on what you don't have. And we've talked a lot about that. And I think one of the ways that we can spread abundance is by spreading gratitude, right? And so I think that there can be people that have seemingly everything that don't feel like they have abundance, and there can be people that feel like that seemingly have nothing that seem to have an over abundant amount of abundance.
Right.
If that's a thing.
And this really ties back into our episode about what is abundance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And being satisfied with that. There's a time where my ultimate goal was I wanted to have enough money to buy the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, it's still a great goal as long as I can get into the owner's box.
Yeah, but there's nothing for me between tens of millions of dollars and that. Like it's like that is many, many billions of dollars. And for me, I don't have that extravagant of a lifestyle or a desire for one. And what I can do at 10 million or 100 million is not noticeably different, or even 200 million. Whereas if you're going to buy the Vikings, you have to have, I don't know. I mean, if it was for sale, it's probably $2-3 billion franchise, maybe more. You probably have to have at least 5 or 10 billion of net worth to make it even realistic.
When is the day of recording this particular podcast? They're playing really, really well right now, but it's early in the season. They typically don't have troubles until December, January.
Thanks, John. You're the best.
Sorry.
Really the best.
But think about that. So, and you don't just want like a small stake in the Vikings. You actually want to call the shots.
Yeah, I would like to own them. Yeah, but that's something that I have also come to the conclusion. I'm probably not willing to sacrifice all the things that would need. Not probably. I am not willing to sacrifice all the things that would be necessary to build that empire.
Yeah.
Right. And, had some things gone a little differently, earlier in life, some things where real wealth disappeared.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be on the table. Maybe it wouldn't. Who knows? Sure. Who knows what would have happened, right? I mean, for all I know, I would have died in a yachting accident had things fallen my way, right?
Who knows?
I mean, I just don't know.
In the meantime, we can watch this season where they're playing fantastic in 2024.
Yes. Yeah. So, one of the places where I think you and I, so far we've talked about things I think we agree on everything. Yeah. I think one of the areas that we probably disagree, or I'm almost guaranteed we disagree, is your sheet is inflation adjusted.
Yep.
And without going too far, I mean, there's a little bit of a tough topic to talk about without opening a whole bunch of cans of worms, right?
Yeah.
But my belief that money is broken, that the people in charge are printing like spending like drunken sailors.
Yeah.
And it's my belief that inflation is going to get worse, not better.
Sure. Based
on, the history of 450 fiat currencies over time, which they all end up going to zero, right? So, first thing, explain how inflation works in your model that we'll put on talesofabundance.com.
Yeah, at the end of the day, inflation exists, and so I think people have to make assumptions about inflation. And so I'm pretty simple about this. Like, I think that, I'm looking at how inflation happens, and then I'm looking about how, income has to shift, over time with that inflation. So I think you can make whatever assessments you want to make about inflation. And in my lifetime, there's been, generally, the government says 3% inflation. There were times in the early 80s where I think we had like 18 or 20% inflation. But if you pay attention to the world more broadly, like Zimbabwe had like, I can't remember how many tens of thousands of percents of inflation. Like, I think I bought like a $1 trillion bill for $8.95 US or something.
Yeah. And now it's probably pennies US.
Yeah. I think we had the peso early in my life, and now we have the new peso, right?
Yeah. I think this is a lot easier for people in those countries to understand, right? Venezuela recently has had mass inflation. Argentina, Turkey, Zimbabwe, Lebanon. I mean, there's a lot of places that have gone through.
Yeah.
You hear the stories about the Weimar Republic. Germany wasn't called that back then, but the Weimar Republic, where people would take wheelbarrows of money to go buy a loaf of bread, or that they would go to the bar and they would order their drinks at the beginning of the night, because the prices would be higher at the end of the night.
Yeah.
Right. And, you heard stories of Americans and Englishmen in particular buying really, really expensive real estate in downtown Berlin for, 20 pieces of gold, or maybe it was even less. I mean, for very little gold, because people, the money became worthless. Right. So I am of the belief, I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow or next week, but we are on a collision course where debt is expanding, money printing is expanding.
Yeah, but federal debt is what you're talking about.
Yeah. But state, local, city debt
government
as well,
debt,
right? Government debt. And if people put that, so I think it's important that it's assets, but I also think it's really important that it's the right assets. One could argue real estate, right? Maybe real estate holds its value. There's an argument that stocks may or may not hold their value in that hyperinflating world. But that is again, I don't think it's a huge possibility tomorrow, but I do think in our lifetimes it's almost inevitable that we're going to have to pay the piper.
Yeah, look, I think the financial finish line for me is about, the level of consumption somebody wants to have, and then how they're going to have the resources to provide for their family for that period of time. And so I think, investing is a big topic, and certainly I think people have to pay attention to what's happening in different asset classes for sure. I mean, that I'm pretty long real estate, and I think that real estate is a great inflation hedge if it's levered, right? The levered real estate is and so I've said that for a long time. And then of course I know you believe a lot in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and that is a way of having an inflation hedge as well. And so,
hold on, Bitcoin, not cryptocurrency.
Sorry. Not my world. Yeah.
Yes, very, very clearly, I believe in Bitcoin.
Got it.
I believe. Look, I think real estate is infinitely better than deflating government currency that they can print / counterfeit anytime they want, right? And will.
But I'm glad you don't have a strong opinion about that, though.
Well, if you or I do it, we call it counterfeiting. They do it. I don't see why it's any different.
They call it the U.S. Mint.
They call it
minting. They mint it.
They frame it very nicely, but it's still counterfeiting at its core, right? There's really no way around that. So having a truly scarce asset, to me, protects. So my financial finish line used to be in dollars, right? And we've been talking because that's easiest for most people to understand.
Sure.
I, a few years ago, changed my financial finish line to a number of Bitcoin. And that's because I'm confident that is going to go up in value because of the ultimate scarcity, not down.
If you're looking at that in terms of assets, I think that's the part where I would disagree with you. Oh, and here's why. If you're looking at it in terms of how many Bitcoin I'm going to spend on my mortgage, how many Bitcoin I'm going to spend on my clothing, how many Bitcoin I'm going to spend on travel, then I think we're perfectly aligned. But if you're like, hey, I'm only thinking about Bitcoin as the asset number, because at the end of the day, the real power in the financial finish line is understanding what the maximum consumption that I want to have in my lifestyle is, so that I can get off the rat race, get off that the rat wheel. What do you call it? The mouse wheel?
The rat race. The wheel.
Yeah.
The treadmill if you want.
Treadmill. Yeah. Get off the treadmill. Get off the elliptical.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the power of the financial finish line is really about not always wanting more and not knowing why.
So I have created a document that's not done. We can add it to the show notes and, or on Tales of Abundance once it's done. But I'm working on a document, and the basic concept is that there's enough Bitcoin that you can spend 1% of it a year to survive.
Yeah.
Right. And I've got to make it a little more. It works for me. It's just, I don't know that it's intuitive enough to share with other people.
And I think, again, neither one of us are financial planners, but I think, the rule of thumb would be that if you spend I can't remember if it's 3% or 4% of your asset base, and then you have like a non-depleting principle, right? 1% non-depleting, right? So that's more conservative than most. Look, I would encourage anybody who has this interest to sit down with a skillful financial planner. Reach out to me or Randy. We have people that we use that we like a lot, and they go through this really complex systems of modeling that is far more sophisticated than what I've done. At the end of the day, for me, the financial finish line, though, is about being okay with I don't need more past this point. Like that's the real power of it, is understanding when is enough enough.
Would you agree that even before sitting down with the financial planner, which I think is great advice, I think the first step is really doing some self-searching, goal setting to really decide what is that lifestyle that they want, right? I think that's the first step. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, we've had different episodes on different things. I think one thing you need to do is know where you are. So, what are you spending today? And what are you really spending today? And just understand it. And then another step would be making a list of all the things you might want, right? And if you have a list of all the things you might want, that starts to create a bucket list. It'll tell you more about your financial finish line, right? And then I think once you have the here and the there, then you can start to decide what's the right path for me.
All right. I think we could beat this up forever, but I think we're, let's put a bow on it.
Yeah. So I think
any last words of wisdom?
Yeah. I think start with what's the budget today? What's the most you'd ever think you want? And you're allowed to change, but plant your anchor. And then see what your glide path is. And then for most people that I talk to, when they look at the value of time, the compounding money over time, and with a financial planner, they can help you with this. But if you look at where you are today and where you want to go, most people that I talk to are further along than they think, and they can see a path, and that generally reduces the stress of getting from here to there. Sometimes, you make some tough decisions. Like for me, I thought that I wanted to make, billions of dollars when I was early in my career, and then I recognized that wasn't that important to me. I was perfectly happy flying on a plane, didn't have to be my own plane. I've had the chance to fly private on a number of occasions, and it's great, it's fun, but I didn't have to have my own plane. And so I started just asking myself, what are the where is time more important? And what I really got to was that I'm chasing time, not chasing money, and money is just a tool. And once I got to that place, it was a much better place. And so it's a set of exercises somebody can go through to get there.
Yeah, I just think people need to figure out where it is they're going as the first step. And they can't figure out how they're going to get there until they figure out where they're going.
And where they are, right?
Yeah.
Where they are and where they're going both. Yeah, I agree. Good stuff, man. Financial finish line. Seems like there wasn't as big a disagreement as we thought. It's good. We talked off the air about how big the disagreement would be. I would have lost the bet if Randy had taken it, but
yeah, I think there's just a disagreement on, and some of this is probably in my mind because I always thought of the financial finish line in terms of bonds and things that, I don't necessarily want to be making 4% interest in a melting ice cube, right? When it starts melting faster than 4% a year.
Well, yeah, my idea of a financial finish line is kind of like asset agnostic, right? It's more about having a path and seeing that you're on the glide path and taking the pressure off yourself for more. So, yeah, all right. Thanks. Until next time. And we should talk off the air about that whole scarcity thing coming back, front and back. That'll be a fun conversation. All right.
Sounds good.
Hey, listeners, talesofabundance.com. Check us out. Make sure that you subscribe, that you like, and keep listening. And if you have ideas about things you want to hear about, let us know. We can't wait to hear it. I'm John. This is Randy. Thanks for listening.